Hey everybody, Ryan Michael Ballo here, doing a video while driving. I got a nice setup with a selfie stick essentially that I managed to rig holding my phone here, so it's a safe setup. Let's talk about cycling off of nootropics. I think a lot of nootropics users want to, we sort of have the desire or the fantasy that we can take nootropics every day for the rest of our lives and that it's totally sustainable. And I think that this certainly could be the case for certain compounds, depending on the compound, because there are people out there that have taken nootropic substances for a pretty long time, like Ray Kurzweil, the futurist, who has a list of 150 to 250 supplements that he takes every day, some of which are nootropics. You've got phosphatidylcholine, L-carnitine, alpha-glycerylphosphatidylcholine, and other nootropics, what we consider nootropics, and seem to be fine. There's really no mention in that dude's literature about whether or not he's cycling, but I think for some substances it seems to be safe to take long term. I'm of the opinion that aniracetam is one of them, is one of the substances that you could take long term and not need to cycle. But I leave room for reinterpretation and realizing that I could be wrong there, and I really don't have many people to look at that have taken aniracetam as an example for 20 plus years every day, every single day, with the exception of maybe cycling off a day here or a day there when they run out or they go on vacation or whatever, but basically every day. We don't really have a whole bunch of literature to, or studies to back up the idea that 20 plus years is safe to take certain nootropics. But I still, like we've talked about in other videos, think that aniracetam particularly, others too, I think L-theanine is probably another one, and a few other nootropics you probably could take long term and have no issues. But what I want to make the points about in this video is that there are a few reasons why you might want to cycle off of all nootropics, whether it's aniracetam, L-theanine, or CDP choline or something. And here are those reasons. Number one, there's downregulation. Downregulation is this thing that occurs, without going into the detailed science, try to put it as lay as possible, when the brain signals from certain neurotransmitters or certain chemicals basically just decrease as a regulatory strategy, as a homeostatic kind of regulatory mechanism that the brain engages in. So if you're taking an acetylcholine stimulating supplement or precursor for the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, and you're taking that for 5 months straight, and at month 5, it starts to become less effective for you in the same dose, then you might be experiencing some type of downregulation. The receptor sites for the neurotransmitters that the precursors make, those receptors are essentially saying, as we receive this signal, we're going to downregulate the potency of this signal, and thus it ends up you're not getting the same effect, right? So there's downregulation, and that probably happens with a variety of different compounds, particularly the ones that go in and act directly as precursors for neurotransmitters like choline and all the analogs of choline for the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, tyrosine, and the other dopamine analogs, or the other really catecholamine analogs like NALT and acetyl L-tyrosine, the acetylated version of tyrosine. So yeah, downregulation is one major reason. The other reason is liver functionality. For a lot of nootropics, aniracetam included, there's a good amount of research to suggest that the liver does not engage in any sort of increase in its enzymes or the release of its enzymes in response to aniracetam, which would indicate that it has a low level toxicity, if any level of toxicity. Right? So there are some nootropics for which this just isn't the case and it doesn't apply. And that's why I don't want to make the broad statement of nootropics in general you should cycle off of, even though I'll probably title this video something similar to that. I want to be specific in this video so that people understand that it depends on what we're talking about. But there are other smart drug compounds and what people might consider nootropics, like adrafinil, for example, that have some literature behind them that point to the idea that they could be potentially toxic to the liver or taxing to the liver over the course of a long time of taking it. Particularly adrafinil, because adrafinil has to be converted through the liver to modafinil. I mean, that's what adrafinil does. It converts into the liver into modafinil. So it's either that conversion process, it's probably that conversion process. I can't think of what the mechanism might be in addition to that, but it's probably that conversion process that makes the drug toxic to the liver or potentially taxing to the liver. I think that there are other nootropics for which this is the case, other smart drugs for which this is the case. I don't have any mechanistic explanations for this, but I have a little bit of anecdotal experience, a little bit of anecdotal reading, and a sort of general consensus around the idea that one of the racetams, one of the really strong racetams, phenylpiracetam, which I think is a great racetam to take sparingly and if you need that extra boost, and I've used it for PM productivity many times, but that compound, which is an actual smart drug and a nootropic, taxes the liver in some way. And I'm really not sure what the basis is for that, whether it's through the liver's kind of first pass where it takes the compound and then distributes it through your bloodstream and up to your brain, or if it's toxic byproducts of phenylpiracetam, byproducts in general, phenylpiracetam, that might be not so great for the liver. I don't know the mechanism there, but if you just go Google phenylpiracetam and liver functionality, you'll come across some pretty interesting articles and some pretty interesting sort of general recommendations not to keep taking phenylpiracetam as a result of its potential to tax the liver. And then, there's the last reason that I think it's critically important to cycle off of nootropics, kind of all of them in general, and that is, I guess, again, this might not apply to every nootropic, but for a lot of the very, very hardcore focused nootropics in general, is that getting yourself back to a place where you are kind of at homeostasis or working toward being at homeostasis in terms of brain function, and that your capacity to slow down a little bit is actually pretty critical for creativity and for reflection on certain things, and for kind of coming to a place where you might be able to let some ideas or thoughts percolate a bit before making a decision, so that you can better understand them. Sometimes I take time off of nootropics. I'll take a week or so or two off of nootropics, and basically invariably when that happens, when I do that, I things slow down a little bit, right? My processing speed slows down, and the truth about having epiphanies and being in a place where you are able to engage your creativity at large scale pretty consistently and let things percolate and come up with new ideas, engaging in the actual act of creativity, is in fact slowing down, right? Sometimes like the best way to speed up, and the best way to speed up is to slow down, and the best way for you to engage in things that are creative and for you to have like these ideas that might just kind of connect together in kind of the back of your mind, as we like to say, that you wouldn't otherwise put together. The best way to do that is to think less and to have less of a significant speed of processing. One of the reasons that I both cycle off of nootropics and meditate is because when I meditate, the whole act of meditation is stopping that fast processing level of thinking and putting yourself in a place where you're just a lot more receptive to the brain kind of unconsciously making changes in relation to something that you've been thinking about, and thus kind of inserting an idea randomly into your consciousness about how to fix something. That happens to me all the time. If something's troubling me consistently and I can't figure out a way to deal with it, and my ordinarily rapid mode of thinking just sort of makes me want to just take some sort of action right away to get it done, I think that's applicable and useful like 90% of the time, but there's that 10% of the time where I just need to meditate and or slow down my thinking, and then a different solution comes to me, and that solution always ends up being better than the solution that I would have made if I was hyper processing, hyper focused, etc. The other thing about a lot of nootropics is that a lot of nootropics really turn on that focus capacity and that sort of laser kind of generalized like prefrontal cortex like automaton lock on focus type of capacity, and it does that in a lot of cases to the detriment of some of these other modes of thinking, which are critically important for creativity, coming up with new ideas, solving problems, and letting things percolate. So we've got, one element of this, of my kind of position on cycling off nootropics that has to do with health. Basically two elements, but one major element, which is the second one we talked about, which is the potentiality for liver damage or for toxicity to the liver or body. Adrafinil and some of the really hard nootropic compounds that may be tough on the liver, like potentially phenylpiracetam, might be a great reason to want to cycle off of nootropics. The first thing that we mentioned, downregulation, where the brain's receptors for certain chemicals start to say, you know what, we're getting bombarded a little too much with this chemical, so we're going to just change our response to this chemical in a way that makes this chemical's engagement in us being the receptor sites, a little less potent. So downregulation is a reason that you might want to cycle off nootropics. Essentially, the layman the layman reason is that you don't get build up a tolerance to the nootropic and it stops affecting you the way that it once did. There's a lot of people for whom various compounds out there like Alpha Brain and other commercial nootropic stacks, they lose potency with people, and it's probably due to something else in their brain, a deficiency in B vitamins or micronutrients, and or downregulation. Then there's the idea of creativity. I'm just kind of summarizing everything. Creativity is critically important to have, and sometimes in order to come up with ideas, in order to solve a problem that's been plaguing you, and in order to kind of just let things percolate and have an idea just pop into your head, like sometimes that happens, that we all kind of know that happens when we calm ourselves down. You really just need to not be thinking so fast. That some of the great ideas that I've come up with and some of the great realizations about how to solve problems that I've had in the course of the last 10 years have come when my brain was not working faster, but a lot slower. And in many cases, it was when I was able to, through meditation and through taking a couple days off of nootropics, or taking a couple days just to chill, when my brain has come to essentially a complete standstill, and I didn't have any of that hyper processing stuff going on. So I think nootropics are wonderful. I mean, we built one. I've been taking nootropics for 6 years, on and off. But I want to make these 3 points that we talked about, and I also want people to know that I cycle off nootropics. This week I haven't taken a nootropic for 2 days now, 2 days now, and I'm going to cycle off moving forward for probably a couple more days, then maybe jump back onto Cortex Generation 2, because that's what I'm sampling right now to try to get the last bit of the ingredients right. But cycling off nootropics and getting your brain back to homeostasis and getting it back to a place where you can be creative and less of that hyper-focused, hyper-processing is a wonderful thing, because then coming back to nootropics is a delightful experience, right? Coming back to nootropics after being at baseline, hopefully you have an optimized baseline, but being at baseline after nootropics, coming back onto nootropics after being just at baseline is an awesome thing. You know, you take your Cortex Gen 1 or your Alpha Brain or Siltep or Aniracetam or modafinil or whatever it is for you, and you know, your brain is just really working awesome, and I think that's a critical part of this whole thing. If you've not tried the Cortex nootropic stack, we made a nootropic stack that is based off of 4 ingredients: uridine monophosphate, which induces neurite outgrowth. That is a projection from neuron to neuron in the brain via axons and dendrites, helps signals to flow smoother. Also works with another ingredient in the stack called CDP choline to build a phosphatide in the brain called phosphatidylcholine. Then we've got artichoke extract, which also works to induce neurite outgrowth via luteolin, and then Bacopa monnieri, which is an ages-old adaptogenic herb that essentially helps the body to deal with stress, is also a mild acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, so it improves the acetylcholine kind of profile of the stack, and is also great for neurite outgrowth, and eventually after long-term usage, helping the brain to formulate memory. So grab a bottle of Cortex at livecortex.com, snag yourself a 30-count bottle. I think you're going to love it. A lot of people do. Most people that try it really love it. I love it. I take it as much as I can with cycling. And that's it. Thanks a lot for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe and like the video and share it if you loved it. Talk to you later.